Checkout tracking by the NPD Group brings you a receipt collecting system that gathers data anonymously through technology we created, providing your businesses with answers.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. Post-lunch crowd. We're like trying to get things really set up. So I don't want to take any of the energy from. We have wonderful panelists today, and so I'll let them introduce each other, introduce themselves, and talk about more of the company. So, start off, Tim.
Hi, I'm Tim Train. I'm currently the CEO of Big Huge Games and the project lead for Dominations, free-to-play game that melds Age of Empires with Clash of Clans. I've been working with publishers in independent development since about 1995, and have worked with many of the big publishers, Electronic Arts, Microsoft, THQ, and most recently Nexon, so I have a lot of thoughts on the subject.
I'm Arash Keshmirian from Limbic. We're an 11-person studio, and our most well-known hit was Zombie Gunship back in 2011. It was the top-grossing game of that summer. And for the follow-up game, Zombie Gunship Inc., we chose to work with a publisher called Flare Games out in Germany, so I'll be talking about our experiences with that deal.
Hi, I'm Oliver Miao from Pixelberry Studios. At my first startup, Center Score, we worked with about a dozen publishers creating mobile games. For Pixelberry, instead of raising money, we actually did a contract deal with a publisher and used that to help finance our studio. And we launched a title called High School Story. That's done well, and we're always thinking about whether we should continue staying independent or hook up with a publisher.
Hi, my name is Alex. I'm the founder and CEO of Level 6. We're a YC-backed social mobile gaming company based in Mountain View, California. We're around 15 people. We've published 3 games to the App Store, 2 which we've gone through publishers. The first one was with Kabam. It was called Age of Chaos. It was top 100 grossing game. And our second is called Toon Squad, which we're publishing with Tango, the messaging app. So yeah.
Cool. So it sounds like many of you have worked with publishers currently or in the past. So can you talk a little bit about why you decided to seek a publisher, or like some of the reasons behind that to begin with?
Philosophically speaking, we always try with every project to hit something that could be a top 20, top of market kind of game. And so for us, it's all about trying to load the dice for our one die roll. We figure that if we hit it big, then everything works out great and everybody goes home happy. And if we don't hit it big, then everybody goes home sad. So a publisher is basically a way of adding a +3 to your die roll if you pick the right publisher and they execute on things down the line. And so that's the reason that we have usually chosen to go with publishers as indies.
Yeah, for us, it came down to a lot of the expertise of our studio and the expertise of the publisher. So we've been a premium studio for the last 6 years. We've dabbled a little bit in free-to-play, but we've never built a game that was free-to-play from the ground up. So a lot of the aspects of successful studios that are doing free-to-play, involves hundreds of people sometimes that are doing user acquisition and monetization and retention studies, analytics. I mean, there's just a massive amount of manpower that you need to actually be top of the charts in a consistent and reliable way. So when we looked at publishers, we were looking at how does their expertise add to ours. While we're very confident on game design and art and all that stuff, we didn't want to take a risk with our next project and try to roll our own team for the free-to-play side.
For my past 2 companies, it's frankly been just about access to money. A lot of these publishing deals, the publishers will pay advances. And for my first company, that was actually how we kept the lights on. And for our second one, as I had mentioned before, it was a good way for us to build up kind of a war chest of cash that allowed us to do our own development.
Yeah, I think my answer is very closely similar to Oliver's. A lot of it's just about capital and access to capital. To give you some context, I think in 2012 is when we launched Age of Chaos. We had raised $1 million coming out of YC, and we kind of thought, hey, if we're going to spend $500K of it developing the game, we only have $500,000 to market the game, and that's an average launch budget for a lot of these companies out there. And so we're like, hey, we only have one shot. So we're like, hey, our game metrics are pretty good, so we should take it to a publisher who has access, millions and millions of dollars, and we can possibly scale it to a much larger size then, right? If you look at the ecosystem today, user acquisition costs are a lot higher for a typical strategy game. $8 to $10 per install is not, it's actually very average, right? And so if you start thinking about that way, your game could cost $2-3 million to make, but if you want to be in the top 25 of the App Store, like a 9-figure launch budget is not like unreasonable, right? And so we don't have that money, and so we kind of turned to publishers to kind of help us get there because our ambitions were, you know, up here, right? So it depends on what your ambitions are or what you're trying to accomplish, basically.
So it's interesting. So you've like you seek publishers for, let's say, expertise, access to capital, also like possibly marketing support and all that help. And so, but a lot of publishers kind of offer this, right? So just to kind of give everyone context, like how many different publishers did you talk to, let's say for your previous stars, like on average? And then also, how do you know like whether this publisher is the one?
Just going down the line,
Yeah.
we probably talked to 10 or 12 because we knew we were aiming for a top 20 hit, and we felt like we had a lot of potential with this game. The number was actually a little smaller than it otherwise might be. We were looking for people that had big networks that we could plug into and were willing to make big bets. As far as, what was your second question? What was
How do you know that that publisher was the one?
Oh, right. How do we know that publisher was the one? For us, it was partly about we really wanted a global distributor, somebody who could help push this game worldwide, and Nexon was very strong in Asia. We had a lot of confidence that we could make and push a Western game, but really liked where Nexon was coming from there. And we rate publishers on, I think, 9 different categories of things that you want them to be able to take over so that you don't have to worry about it. Things like UA, PR, community, CS, some aspects of some technical support, DevOps that it's easier for them to scale than your small little indie studio. And so you try to evaluate those down the line. And then you're also looking for somebody that you can feel like you have some strategic alignment with, that your canoes are going in the same direction. So.
Yeah, for us, we talked about the same number, about 10 to 12 different publishers. And it came down to, like I mentioned earlier, the expertise aspect. But another really important piece for us was the location of the studio. So, or the publisher rather. I mean, if you're working with, for example, a Korean publisher, and you don't really want to go to Korea every 2 months, or the location of that publisher is in a place that's inconvenient or not interesting to you, it's tough because oftentimes we find that our relationship with Flare Games, our publishers in Karlsruhe in Germany, it's easy because we have people in Germany who can visit them once every 2 weeks and just talk things out with our producers there. And it builds a really close relationship rather than having a relationship where, hey, you kind of see them every once in a while and you're one other face in the crowd of people that they're publishing. You build a closer relationship. And oftentimes, when a publisher has to make decisions of like, well, we want to support this game in our portfolio over this game, those personal relationships with the people on the ground there really matter. The other aspect to it was going and evaluating that publishers, once they made our shortlist, evaluating their other clients. So I went and took about 2 months and visited pretty much every person who'd ever worked with Flare Games and said, hey, how's the deal going? And are you guys enjoying the work? Are they giving you the value that you expected? Looking through our shortlist, some of the publishers that we didn't go with, and I can't name names, but we got some really interesting answers where, from the outside it looked like things were going great, but when we talked to the developer, they were like, yeah, they really didn't help us with UA, and we had to do a lot of it ourselves, or the market knowledge that they brought to the table wasn't really that valuable. So I really urge a lot of kind of proper due diligence when you're doing these deals. Just go out and meet other people that have worked with them. Often there's a camaraderie between developers where you can just speak frankly about how the deal went. And I found that to be hugely helpful.
Yeah, my studio's in a slightly different position. So we're only talking to about a half dozen publishers right now. And as our company has evolved, what's been important to us is changing. So I mentioned to you before, for my previous deals, it was all about the money and the access to the capital. Now, it's starting to be more about the access to bigger brands. And so money is still a part of that, because if we were going to do a game with a really big celebrity, the minimum guarantees for some of those celebrities could be $5–10 million, something that my studio doesn't have that type of money for. But working with the right publisher, they may have access both to the celebrity or the brands as well as the capital to fund that.
Yeah, I think same thing, or not like Oliver, but for the rest of the panel, I think when we decided to choose a publisher, we talked around 10 or 15 of them. I mean, obviously, like, as you know, your startup is your baby. You spend a year and a half in development of this new title. You give it your all. You want to make sure that the partner you're pretty much getting to bed with is like on the same page with you about where you want to take the title, right? So again, as I said before, capital is really, really important for us because we wanted to make sure that we had a partner that could basically help us scale the game to where we want it to be, like a top 25 game. That's one. Two, you had to make sure the publisher is aligned with the incentives. So for example, there's some publishers out there that just they're gearing up for IPO and they want to grow their top line, right? And so it's very advantageous for the developer because, you know, a publisher may just, you know, aggressively kind of grow the game basically, right? And like not like, put profits aside. So that's something interesting for a developer. Another thing to be wary of is like, for example, if you're working with a gaming company and they have competing kind of games in the genre that you're making, that's kind of dangerous because imagine like if you're a publisher and you need to choose where to put $5 in UA, do you want to put it into like your mid-core game or do you want to put it into the published mid-core game? So those are things to think about. And if your game isn't performing, they may just like put it in the sideline. So that's stuff to think about as well. But in general, I think as long as you find a publisher that is willing to, you know, believes in your product, is willing to put capital there, and is on the same page with you about results and expectations, that generally generates a good result, I would say.
There's also, somebody had mentioned earlier that, you know, being sure that you try to find gamers that at every level of an organization, that's super important, and not people that just view games as widgets to be pushed through a channel. People that have a passion for games, that really care about putting out good products is another key thing to look for.
Yeah, I know of a studio that when they were evaluating publishers, they sent each of them an early build of the game, and they had analytics inside their game to actually see how much did they really play it. And so they could see that one of the studios or publishers, they like played it for half an hour and they came back with like, oh yeah, this is really interesting, we love to work with you. Another one played for like 16 hours and like over one weekend. And so they had a really good sense of like, do these people really care? Do they go deep into the games? Or is it just a sort of throw money and hope it comes back kind of situation?
Cool. So I guess like one other question that we often get a lot, like a lot of developers get a lot, is how do you pitch to developers? Like once you make the decision to be like, you know, I do want to, you know, go work with a publisher, how do you find and build those, identify and build those relationships? And then secondly, it's like, what do these publishers look for? We can start from the opposite end this time, so.
Oh no, I was like, I have time to think, it's all good. Repeat the first question.
So it's like, you know, you made a decision, so it's like, how do you find publishers to work with, especially if you're coming from, if you don't have, let's say, like, you know, you're just like small indie studio and you don't have any prior relationships, or maybe you have little relationships, right? Like, how do you go find the publishers, actually go talk to the beginning, like, get the meetings? Let's start with there first, and then we'll go. It's like,
well, it's hard to answer that question. I think a lot of that is just good old BD. I mean, so obviously, like, creating a really good game and a really fun game is the most important thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you have to have a good game. Like, if you have a fun game, your attention's probably going to be good. That's just how it is, right? Fun things are attentive. So you need to have a good game first. Let's assume you have that. Honestly, if you guys want to be connected to a publisher, I'm happy to make intros. Super easy, you know, just do that. But I mean, for us, for example, when we first started out, I think Greek came out with a press release saying that they're starting to open up a fund, and then they, you know, were looking for games to publish. I literally just like cold emailed them and then added everyone on LinkedIn. And I was like, hey, look at my game, right? And then they're like, okay, send me your metrics, and it kind of went from there. And then that person connected me to someone else, et cetera, et cetera. So really, it's just good old-fashioned BD, like getting someone to connect you to someone else, right? That's how I would put it. Or I can connect you guys also.
Yeah, so for my first company, we were doing web-based games, and after a year and a half, we basically failed. We were about to shut down, and on the very last day, we got a phone call from a friend. So that's one way to do it, right? A friend, a serendipitous connection, something happens, and they asked us if we wanted to make a cell phone game, and that's how we got into cell phone games. But what we realized is where we failed as developers for our first year and a half is we didn't spend enough time on business. It was 4 guys, we all were programming. I spent 25% of my time on the business side of things. And when we looked at what we did wrong, we realized we needed to spend a lot more time on business. So I went from 25% of my time on business to 100% of my time. And I'm still an introvert, but back then, fresh out of school, it was very scary for me to talk to people. And so the fact that you guys are already here at this conference, I think is a great start. And just talk to a lot of people. At my first conferences, I would get to this session early, and since I didn't know anyone, I just talked to the person on my left, and then I talked to the person on my right. After enough of those meetings, something happened. At one of the sessions I went to, the person on my left worked at Sega, the person on my right worked at Sony. And you do have to continue the conversation. We talked to both companies for several months, but at the end of it, we actually got a deal with both those companies. So it really comes down to just a lot of footwork and, you know, talking to a lot of people and just trying to generate business.
Yeah, absolutely. I think following the relationship is really key. Just to add to the kind of BD tips, the people that we've met at conferences, I mean, when we met Flare, we didn't do a deal with them for probably about 6 months, and it was just kind of getting to know each other, and there wasn't really an idea of even working on a game. We just had some mutual friends that had worked with them, and really it wasn't a consideration until quite a while down the line. So as with any sort of business, I think approaching a publisher and saying, hey, I need you to publish my game, generally takes you less far than just, hey, we're doing this thing and we just like to get to know you guys. That typically helps. It's difficult as a starting studio. I think a lot of publishers want to make safer bets, and they want to go after people who at least have some established portfolio to show that they work together well as a team, and they have a creative style that fits with whatever it is the publisher wants to do. But that said, yeah, I think coming to conferences and getting to know them is the best way. Once you kind of get your foot in the door, then you start to meet other ones, and you bounce around and do your networking. But the start is always hard, and I think like most studios, we got our start at conferences as well.
BD legwork, super important. Part of the trick is to really think about what your narrative is as a developer and how it fits into what the publisher is looking for. Like, you really have to research the publishers and understand like where are the genres that they're interested in competing in, like what unique thing could you theoretically bring to the table, and then how do you craft a narrative around what it is that you bring to the table. If even if it's like, oh, we have these 3 team members who worked on the #1 whatever aerial zombie game, or whatever the thing, like whatever you can find to pitch about your company, that crafting of the narrative is super important. And yeah, don't undervalue the importance of BD. A lot of people, especially with programming backgrounds, are like, oh, BD is lame. It's for the frat boys who couldn't get jobs as coders. But stereotypically, you need the hacker, the designer, and the huckster to start your game company. And so somebody's got to be the huckster, and so just embrace that role for you or for your team, and go to town.
Yeah, I think it's important to be able to delegate some of your tasks. If you have a small team, and when we started our deal, we were 7 people, and I was still doing like some coding, some game design stuff, like business or tax things, hiring things. When we started to do the deal, I needed to go do the due diligence. It was sort of, I just went to my co-founders and said, guys, like for the next 3 months, I'm not going to do anything but build this deal. And when it came to doing the research to meet other developers, doing the negotiation with the publisher, it was enormously helpful to have my mind clear and only on that one deal. And it's such an important thing for the company. I don't know why you'd do it any other way and try to split that attention.
Cool. You don't have to be a frat boy to be in business development, Tim. But
well, I didn't want to stereotype broadly, but
right, right. But it's interesting how you're talking about narrative and then kind of like getting to know a publisher and seeing if they're a right fit for you. And so it's kind of like, what are some of the things that they're looking for when they're kind of like finding games? So, or talk about the things, at least in your experience, what you find like really, really resonated with some of the publishers that you previously worked with or try to do deals with.
I guess having a reliable team is a big one. So proving that you've worked together before, you're not going to go out and like hire everybody the next day, and it's going to be this totally unproven team that might have internal conflicts, things like that. For them, a lot of it's risk mitigation. So having a portfolio always helps. Existing relationships with platforms is sometimes good. Like if you already know folks at Apple and Google and you've been able to get your stuff featured, it certainly helps them on their PR side as well. Really, if you have just skills that complement what they do, I think if you can show them that, hey, this is a studio that's like the other ones in our portfolio, and in terms of quality, that helps a lot. So one thing I always suggest when you're going to go talk to a publisher is just see who else they're working with. And if those other companies are nothing like you, like if they're only publishing Asian gacha-based mechanic games, and you want to build like a MOBA that's for Western audiences, well, that publisher's probably not a good fit for you. So a lot of it is just kind of seeing what they're looking for and molding your pitch to that.
Okay, I'll jump in. I guess for me, yeah, it's a lot about team and whether you can execute or not, right? I think like for all the publishing deals that we kind of got offers for, a lot of it. So with Age of Chaos, let me start with Age of Chaos, because we pretty much had 0 portfolio at that time, and it was like my second title that looked like a free-to-play game that had like some okay monetization, but a lot of it was like, okay, we know who this team is generally, right? Who they are. They haven't done much, but we know who they are. And then one of the most important things, we had to show them our metrics. They're like, okay, well, have you guys soft launched it yet? So this is assuming that like you already made the game. They're like, oh, what do your retention metrics look like? What do your monetization metrics look like? And they kind of look at it and they're like, okay, well, we can probably help scale this along a little bit. And so they decided to kind of take a bet on us, right? And then for our second title, because our first title, or because that last title had somewhat succeeded, it was an easy decision, right? The most recent title we launched was called Toon Squad. We got like a lot of publishing offers because it was just pretty easy. We were able to show like our retention was good and our monetization was good, and it was pretty much a no-brainer. I'm a pretty bad salesman, and I'm not one of those guys that can go into a meeting and just talk about like magic and unicorns and stuff and be like, give me $1 million, and they're like, okay, right? I'm one of the guys that just has to go in there and be like, look, I already laid it all out for you, I already figured it all out, just give me your money and like let's do this, right? Like I'm one of those guys, and I mean obviously, number incentives need to align, all that stuff, not just money, but ultimately, you know, if I were to kind of go into a publisher today, I would just be prepared, like. Be prepared that you actually know your stuff, right? Because just imagine yourself, if you're gonna give someone like a bunch of money, you're gonna trust in a team, don't make it like a gamble for them, right? Make it like, oh, you know you're gonna succeed because of X, Y, and Z. And a lot of that is just your metrics, basically, right? That's kind of how we kind of approached it.
So kind of a follow-on question here is also, what's the right time to go and talk to the publisher? Like for you were pretty far along, and so you'd already developed the game. You're mostly looking for someone to help you with the launch and the marketing. Other people go to a publisher with just some concept art, and you're looking for them to do almost more of a co-development and share. So if that was the case for us. We had some concept art, we had a really rough prototype of the game, and we were looking for their expertise in designing it from the ground up. I'm curious to see what your experiences are with that.
Yeah, I would say, you know, Arash is lucky in terms of his team has had a lot of successes, and so, you know, going back to Ko's question of what they're looking for, they really are looking for people who had past successes, but you know, everyone starts new. And so a lot of the recommendations I give to my friends who are interested in getting into the games business is really to first spend your time on a small indie project and really use that as a reference point. If you have a good demo to show people, you know, and you're showing it not just to publishers, but to friends, to press, to different people, you start building up a small reputation that way. And it usually turns out that as you show a new game to someone, you'll find someone who they may not be interested in themselves, but they may tell you like, hey, I know someone who did something similar and you should go talk to them. And after a couple connections, you start getting introduced to the publishers. And getting introduced to someone and having a demo that you can show, I think is really helpful.
Yeah, one other minor point, sometimes people will ask, you know, should we go to a publisher with a portfolio of pitches, like we could do one of these 3 games, what are you guys interested in, or go all in on a single title? And our experience has always been that the publishers really want to know that you are like just going whole hog on a single game that you're really passionate about, that you're going to devote the team to, and coming in with like, yeah, it could be this, it could be that, it could be that, is a way to kind of diffuse their interest and not get the kind of focus that you need to actually close a deal.
Cool. So one of the things, so let's talk about just like some situational stuff. So can you like describe at least one very difficult situation that you had with a publisher? I'm sure a lot of developers, you know, they've encountered, at least in some point in their lives, like some difficulty, like whether it's communicating or getting stuff done. And then if you had a difficult situation, how did you work with that publisher to resolve it? Or did it get resolved? So who wants to start?
Yeah, exactly.
So I can talk about my first company since that was a little while ago, but we actually signed too many deals with publishers and we were very resource constrained. And so we were trying to balance working on 3 different games at the same time. And one of the publishers wasn't happy with how much work we were getting done. And so they actually had their producer from their company come sit with us. And at the time we were a small startup, 4 guys working out of a living room of an apartment. And so we had this guy from a publisher just sit there with us, and all he did was just sit there to make sure that we were working on their game, right? But I think this leads to the fact that once you sign a deal with a publisher, communications is really key, right? And they're betting their resources and their money on you, and they want to make sure that your project is going the way and meeting their expectations. So making sure you have that open line of communications is really helpful.
And one of the things is to know that business development doesn't stop when you sign the deal. Like you've got, in order to have the context to resolve those issues, you've got to actually continue to put effort in it. I try to get to Korea to be with Nexon 2 or 3 times a year. I probably should be there even more, but we do work mostly with the San Francisco subsidiary. And so you just, when you have to have the hard conversations, it helps a lot if you've already got a pre-existing relationships with people that you've maintained.
Yeah, I guess communication helps with these types of situations. One of the challenges that we're facing is just hiring people in the Bay Area. Hiring engineers is really hard here. And so we've been in constant contact with the publisher, but it's something that I could see really devolving into a bad situation. So we're pushing back our end of pre-production deadline a little bit, just because we want to staff up before we go into full production and increase our burn rate. So that comes out of good communication with the publisher. Like I mentioned, we go and visit them every 2 weeks in Germany. And so those types of things help it so they're not surprised. I think in general, surprises are bad for publishers and leads to these types of situations where they're kind of like, well, what's happening with our investment, and do we need to send in more people to make these guys do what we want them to do? We try to really do it in a collaborative way where the hard decisions that we make with them, rather than having them be surprised that, hey guys, this isn't ready, and it's kind of just a surprise. Yeah.
Yeah, I think communication is really, really key. For us, our publisher was literally in the same city as us, so we're communicating with them like every single day. But with that said, I really, 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 really want to stress like expectations. One of the biggest headaches we've had are two things, right? Like, for example, when we built Toon Squad, our game that we published right now, is that we built it with an expectation that it's going to be around for 5, 6, 7 years, right? It's a social game. It's emphasizes on chat, and so we wanted to really invest a lot of time into infrastructure, as well as like the chat. Like we built our own chat servers, etc., so we can maintain users for a long, long time, right? And you can imagine as a publisher, it's kind of scary because they're like, dude, we're paying you so much money, and we can't start marketing it yet. We can't start like generating all this revenue off of it. Why aren't you guys working on monetization, all that stuff, right? So there's this weird conflict where you're trying to build them the best game possible that they can service for a long, long time. Like most games nowadays, it needs to have a long tail to it, right? So that was one of the big things. They push us to market early, and as a developer, you kind of just need to say, okay, fine. Like maybe we should just focus on the short term for now. Another thing is marketing. ROI payback on ad spend is, it depends on what people are looking at, right? Like for example, industry average right now is if you spend $5, for example, you can earn that $5 back in like 6 months to a year. That's like the average for mobile games right now. Some publishers may have unrealistic expectations, like 1 month or 2 months. That's like 2012 basically, and that can cause some problems as well. And it forces like the developer to start shifting focus on like end game content to early monetization, for example, and that starts to become a headache. And a lot of this can be solved with communication, like constantly communicating with them, telling them what exactly your roadmap looks like. But at the end of the day, like, mobile gaming is getting to be somewhat of an expensive business, and when a lot of that money is kind of going out the door, a lot of people start freaking out and they want their money in quickly. So there's always that to be thought about. And so that's why I'm saying when you kind of go into a publishing agreement, sure, the money is cool, the free users are cool, like off of the network, etc. But like making sure that they're exactly on board with what you're trying to plan, what you're planning to do is really, really, really important, right? And these like two things specifically have given like our studio specifically an enormous headache, right? So be careful.
What was something you wish you knew like before, like now that like you've worked with several publishers, what was the one thing that you wish you knew ahead of time before you started on this path?
I wish I knew how commercially successful it would be to work with them. I don't know. It's hard because when we first signed the deal, everyone was really happy. We took like 6 months to negotiate the contract down to like the dot, and we all went out for dinner and stuff. Like, oh, this is awesome. We made our first like 10 grand a day. We all went out to dinner. It was awesome. Yay, right? But then when things go bad, they go like super bad. And a lot of the times it can be for many different reasons. Oh, the publisher doesn't want to go into publishing anymore. It doesn't make sense anymore. Or one of their board members thinks that they should focus on a different sector, not gaming anymore. So it's hard. I don't know. It's I think it's kind of what the other panelists said. I think like doing a lot of research on, what you think where the publisher is going to go, right? Make sure that they're very serious about publishing. Make sure that they want to stay in that sector, and I think that's what I kind of wish I knew. It was hard because when you're working with them, it seems all fine and dandy, and they're committed and they want to go there. But yeah, it's kind of hard to predict.
Yeah, for me, I think it's the fact that it takes a lot more time than you think just to manage the relationship and to sign the deals, and it's a lot of resources and drain on the studio. And that's why right now we're still contemplating whether we should work with the publisher for a new game or not. And the reason we would not work with a publisher, I think the number one reason for us would just be that amount of time it takes. We could take that time and focus instead on building a project. That's also why I think for For newer developers, focusing on smaller projects where you can finance it yourself and kind of just start learning on your own is a really good approach. And then moving up the chain, and when you're looking at a game that may take you 6 months to build or a year to build, starting to think about publishers then.
Yeah, we spent the first 6 years of our studio doing everything fairly ad hoc. It was like, well, here's a game idea, and we'll do some stuff, and we'll build some prototypes, and that didn't work. Let's do this other thing, and we'll get the artists to do it. Yeah, they can come in next week. Maybe we'll do it then. I don't know when we'll do the art. Yeah, let's do it next weekend. It was really just kind of a take them as they come approach. But when we started working with the publisher, like you said, there's just a huge amount of organizational overhead that they bring in. I mean, planning all the different features, putting them into milestones, having a really, really clear plan for the project. Really well-defined game design documents, and then all the features really planned out. That's something that wasn't familiar to us, and I would say that it's certainly helped the project, but the amount of time that we spend doing that really sets off our estimates from what they used to be, the kind of thing that we're used to spending on building a game.
The mistakes I made were not investing enough in understanding enough about a publisher, like how much management turnover do they have? Like, very often your deal depends on the good graces of a stakeholder, and is that stakeholder somebody who's been there for a bit? Are they, is it a company that regularly does reorgs or turn things over? That's something that's gonna impact your long-term stability with that publisher.
So we're going to switch some gears a bit. With the kind of the rise of mobile, we've actually, and with some of these app stores, we've actually, a lot of developers now have access to users and players in different markets outside of their home markets. Can you speak a little bit about how you can work with a publisher, or like kind of approach maybe this aspect of like reaching international markets via these publishers, and what do you look for? Has that thought ever crossed your mind? So.
I mean, it was certainly one of the big reasons that we signed with Nexon. They had a company with a 25-year history of working in Asian markets, and they had rolled up a pretty good stake, and were interested in expanding into the Western market. And we felt like we brought good Western skills that we hoped would be complemented by their strength in Asia. So.
One of the big headaches as a small studio is localization, and that's something that our publisher is handling for us. So just that in itself is huge for reaching at least EFIX countries and larger Europe, and then Asia, of course, is another big translation headache. We try to do it ourselves in our last release, Tower Madness 2, and I want to say it consumed like 20% of our developer resources of just like getting translations, checking translations, the QA on translations. It's a lot for a tiny studio, but definitely something a publisher helps out a lot with.
Yeah, Ko brings up a good point. I mean, for us, our game is, it's not in Asia right now. So we're not in Korea, we're not in China, we're not in Japan. And the only way I would actually approach those marketplaces would be with a publisher, because the markets are so different. And my team, we really understand the US and some of the other Western countries pretty well. But when it comes to that player base and just what they're looking for and what they want, it's so different than the Western market. So I think it's important not just to work with someone who's connected there and has relationships with all the platforms, but someone who can actually tell you, like, you need to change your art style, and this is how you should do it so that your game can be more successful.
Yeah, I agree absolutely with Oliver, and I think Tim is doing absolutely the right thing working with Nexon. I think if I were to go into Korea or China with our game, I wouldn't know where to begin. I'm not even talking about like culturally, even like with the platforms, I wouldn't even know where to begin. It would just kind of flop. I mean, I think this kind of speaks to all industries, right? I think about eBay and Taobao, all these other industries. Like the culture in the United States is very different than the culture in, let's say, even like China, for example, right? Like the art style of my game would probably not fly in China. It just wouldn't. Like it just completely vastly different mechanics. Everything is different. So, I didn't grow up there, so I would literally need, that's where kind of the huge value add comes in, is like, for example, even like marketing wise, right? Like for example, in China, a lot of, because their cities are so, dense, like they do a lot more like physical like advertising spaces and whatnot, right? But you don't actually see that in the US. Like that's like a nuance that I would never be able to know to do, for example, because we're very performance marketing based in the US. So, go with the publisher. It's like hands down, do it. Candy Crush is doing it. That must mean you should do it, right? So, yeah.
There's also a sense that some publishers will use other publishers to publish in other areas. So like Flare Games doesn't focus on doing Asia, but they use another publisher to do that, a well-known Asian publisher. So there's certainly kind of a not necessarily one size fits the whole world. One publisher carries you to everywhere you're going to want to go. And in negotiating your deal, you may actually figure out what those carve-outs are for the other publisher to come in and help with Asia and other markets.
So would you, I guess this is our last, it's like 1:37, so one more question do we have until Q&A? And so just kind of like to end things, would you work with a publisher again for a future title? And like why or why not? So.
I think the decision to work with a publisher depends on what you're trying to accomplish as a developer. If you're trying to enter a mature market like the way that mobile is these days, I think that it's helped a lot by a publisher. Basically, power will always seek to aggregate more power, and in a mature ecosystem, the big guys are going to win. And so it just makes your task that much harder if you're trying to break in without a partner that has interests that are aligned with you. If you're in a newer ecosystem or a platform transition, or if you feel like you've got some really transformative idea, Minecraft type of idea, then you can see how going it alone works. But for every Minecraft that's a success, there's probably 10,000 developers that putted along for 6 months and then failed. So. In short, yes, we would work with a publisher again, especially if we were aiming for continued success on mobile.
I guess the right answer for me is ask me again in a year. But so far, yeah, they've been checking all the boxes for us. We definitely continue to work with them, and we're having a really good time. It's been giving us the ability to do things that we just couldn't do as a 10-person studio.
For me, I think it's a maybe. And it really comes down to, do you need to work with the publisher, and what can they bring to the table? Right? I think today you've heard a lot of the reasons why people work with them, right? Access to capital and money and funds, access to more experience, learning from them, and just seeing how they approach things. For instance, with Arash, like he's learning a lot more just about kind of a production schedule at a larger game company. And those things will help you as you continue to build out your business. But at the same time, if you don't need those things, then the time commitment and just the enormous amount of brain power that needs to go to manage this relationship may not be worth it, and that's why it's a big maybe for me.
For me, it depends. It's different levels. If I'm trying to go into international market, I 100% would work with a publisher. Meaning, like I'm publishing in the United States myself. It's a successful title. I'm trying to go into international market. Then I would work with like Nexon or Tencent, etc. Another thing is I would work with the publisher in the US in the condition that I'm using as a stepping stone to something greater. Because I don't think so we didn't go into the economics of how publishing deals work out, but I don't think the economics lend a game to be like a top 5, top 10 game, which is ultimately what every game studio wants to be. So if you're using it as leverage to kind of the next thing, your next big idea, then sure, I would use a publisher. It's a good learning experience, and working with a partner is a great learning experience. So personally, for where I am now, I would not use a publisher ever again for publishing in the US. If you guys asked how I were to do it, I would just literally bootstrap it, get good metrics, open a line of credit with a bank against our iTunes receipts, and then scale the game that way. I would not go to investors because the economics don't make sense on returns, but they do make sense for a bank to make interest off of your iTunes receipts and stuff like that because gaming, LTVs and whatnot. And I would scale the game that way. There's been many successful gaming companies that have actually scaled that way. One of them is the top 3 grossing game right now. So that's kind of the way that I would approach it. Just keep control of your product. Like at the end of the day, you guys are developers. You're working 24 hours a day on building your product. You live and breathe the mechanics. You know the ins and outs of it. You design all the data, all the numbers, all the live ops. So you know your game best. At least I think so. I think maintaining that control is really, really important. And if you have confidence that you know exactly what you're doing, I think you should do it yourself. But that's me, though.
Thanks. So we have 10 minutes for questions. So someone want to donate their mic? You go.
Thanks. Andrew with Applets. A question for you guys. Everyone's talking about the business aspects of working with a publisher, but did a publisher ever bring anything on the creative side in terms of like gameplay, style of the game, just structuring of the game, maybe adding in some cool ways to produce more of a monetization style to your game as opposed to just here's money, we know how to market, etc.?
So last week in Germany, we had 2 full days with Flare where we sat down with their monetization experts who essentially what they do is they play all the games all the time and do really in-depth research of the economics inside those games. So we brought to them our our ideas for here are the elements of the game, and here's how we're thinking, and then they give us a really in-depth analysis of like, well, this piece will work really well, but then this piece might monetize better if you do it a different way and use this mechanic from this other game. So certainly, yeah, I think there are publishers that support you in that way. And that was a big part of the deal for us, and so we're getting value there.
Yeah, I feel like many times publishers actually over the years have been a great sanity check for us, that they've saved us from ourselves, some of our own creative excesses. And again, this is part of why you really look for people that have a passion for games and a knowledge of the space. But over a 15-year period, I mean, there's been several different times that pop immediately to mind of like, oh yeah, they actually like were able, because they were external to the team, they were able to zero in on why we were having such a hard time with this or that or the other thing. And so, yeah, they have actually helped on the creative side. Now, on the other hand, when you have people that don't know games or that are more dilettantes about game design than people who have actually tried to face the hard trade-offs of game design, then you can get a lot of randomization from the publisher that you then have to manage carefully to avoid the ego bruising that can come. So again, this is just one of the reasons it's really important to partner with somebody who knows games and has developed games.
Yeah, so this doesn't relate to myself, but one of the big success stories I've heard in the mobile gaming industry is a company called Ayugo. They work with Gree. So Ayugo is a really, really good developer, and they develop kind of like these cool casual games. And then they kind of partnered up with Gree, got an investment, and they started making freemium games like Knights and Dragons, and it was really, really successful. And I think that there was a huge value add there for them. Okay, well, I don't know if this is true, but it's from my own observations, is that Gree is really, really good at monetizing users as well as building engaging gameplay. And when they kind of paired those two together, they built like a really, really good title that was successful as well as pretty fun. So I think that it depends on where you are in your own development skills. Like if you're pretty confident in monetization, then give it a go yourself. But what do you want from a publisher is basically what it would be, right? Because I think there are definitely publishers out there that can teach you how to make a top grossing game, right? But it'll basically cost you, right? Rev share or whatever it is how I would look at it.
So I'm back over there.
Could you guys talk a little bit about some of the specific economics on the deals? Obviously, some of them might not be, you might not be able to talk about your specific deals, but is it typically for one game? Is it for all your games for the next 5 years? Is it an equity stake? Is it, what happens if you don't deliver? Those sorts of specifics.
So I can't talk about specifics of our deal, obviously, but I can talk a little bit about the building blocks that we saw as we talked to different publishers. So typically what publishers want is a combination of course, some revenue share. Some publishers ask for IP rights. So in that case, it tends to lend itself to having multiple games under the same IP. And of course, that depends on whether or not you have IP to begin with. So in our case with Zombie Gunship, that's something that came onto the table. Some will actually take stock in the company. There's like an investment piece of the deal. In occasion, there are situations where the developer is asked to fund part of the development alongside with the publisher, so the developer makes a financial investment. Just trying to think about what other things we've seen. Yeah, those are kind of the major ones. There's typically it kind of depends on the structure of the publisher. Some are just more interested in doing the funding side, and others are more interested in kind of getting specific pieces of rev share on the back end. What else have you guys seen?
Yeah, I think at the top end of the type of deals you could get, there are a number of publishers out there who are basically fully financing development of a game, and these games, may take 1 to 2 years. So they're actually paying advances in, I'd say the low multiple millions, with revenue shares that are often 50-50. And but that's at the very high end, and those are going oftentimes to developers who have either a track record in this space or a track record on console or in games in general. And then at the low end, as Arash said, there's just a very wide variance. But there are publishers who are interested in very small deals. And sometimes, when you're working with a publisher, it's more to build your reputation and less for any advance they may pay. And in those cases, there are smaller companies who they're interested in working with you because it helps grow their portfolio. And for you, they can get you in front of the media, potentially help with getting a feature with one of the platforms. And those type of deals work out well too.
We've often done an equity share, which has the nice advantage of aligning your interests a little more with the publisher. And so that's a key piece that we've done. Another little tips and tricks or whatever is to always think about building in different royalty tiers for success. Like, don't just go with whatever a flat royalty is. Kind of negotiate for that first piece, but then at certain milestones you can jack up the royalty share, and that's a way that you both are aiming for a real top of the market hit.
Yeah, I would say that it's kind of what they've already stated before. The one that I would recommend the most, if you guys can manage to get it, is the one with the investment piece up front, and then and you have a rev share after that with a minimum marketing guarantee, because that one really aligns the incentive of both parties to make sure the studio as well as the game is successful. The other two rev shares that kind of models that I've seen is just off of a pure rev share. So let's say like, again, example, 60-40, 60 to the developer, or sorry, 60 to the publisher, 40 to the developer. I've seen those type of rev shares also for like more like new developers. I've also seen things that are like they give you a revenue advance kind of thing, but it's also 100% marketing recoup first. So like the publisher will basically get all their money back on marketing first, and then it's a rev share split after that, so it's a profit share. The reason why that one is actually useful, it sounds scary because you're giving 100% of the revenue away until they get all the marketing back, but the reason why that one economically makes sense is because you want the publisher to scale your game as much as possible. So let's say you're buying an install for $3, right? If he has 100% marketing recoup, then he can get that $3 back fairly quickly. But if it's like a rev share of like 60-40, he has to recoup that $3 off of 60%. The economics become really hard, and he might not scale your game as quickly, right? So these are a lot of like things to think about. All deals have like nuances, but the one that I personally haven't tried, but I think I've seen successful in the marketplace, has been the one where it's like an investment piece up front and then a rev share after that with a sliding scale based off of performance, as what Tim said, right? So for example, if you hit like it's like, let's say your revenue share starts at 60-40, 60 to the developer. If you hit like 5 million a month in revenue, it slides to 50-50, etc. Like those are the ones I've seen work the best. Yeah.
Something else we haven't talked about too much is just genres. And if you're a developer looking for a publisher right now, I would say think about doing a mid-core game, because that's what's really hot with publishers right now. And if I go talk to a publisher about a simulation game, because I've had a successful track record, they might do a deal with me, but a lot of them are just saying, sorry, we're not interested in that space anymore. And they see that mid-core games are making a lot of money and monetizing really well. And if you have a game in that space right now, you can have multiple publishers basically competing for you for the best deal.
I think we have time for one more question. One more? No?
Oh, right here.
All right, cool, up here in front. Yeah, right here.
Are you in contact with publishers regarding retention and engagement, not only like publishing and acquisition?
What was the question? Sorry.
So if you're using publishers also to continue and engage your end users and to continue to increase their lifetime value and stuff like this, are you using the experience for that as well?
So are you asking like after launch, do they still help you?
Yes.
Is that the question? Yeah. So most publisher deals go on well into the live ops phase of the game. So post-release, so the first updates, all those things, I think are an important part of every deal. So yeah, my understanding is a lot of publishers will help. We're not there yet, obviously, so I can't speak from experience, but that is something that's part of the deal.
Yeah, and in this business, I mean, the live ops is a key part of the business. So we've had publishers who've approached us and talked to us about, can they work with us on our existing game, High School Story, and they would help try and contribute more on the data side and help us with our retention or different type of features to get those better. And if we can do enough of a lift, they would do a revenue share based off of the increase. So there's definitely a lot of interest in that.
Yeah, I think in terms of, I think if the question is addressing live ops, I do think that publishers will try to do that. I mean, live ops is incredibly important, not only for retention, but for monetizing a user over a long period of time. I guess a good way to think about it is like our publisher really wanted us to do this. Like World of Warcraft, right? Recently they've been pushing their game to be more casual, so they have like daily quests, so users kind of come back in every day and they're engaged and they kind of like try to complete the new daily quests. We see a lot of that in mobile games where a lot of publishers are now pushing us to kind of have this live operation system where we can, where we constantly supply users with new goals and new tasks, and users will come back every single day and retain and kind of complete these goals. And yeah, I mean, there's tons of publishers out there that are excellent at live ops. Almost any Asian publisher is phenomenal at it. In the US, we're catching up very quickly. So yeah, you can't really go wrong. Just work with a gaming company. I'll put it that way.
Cool. Well, thank you everyone for your time. So we'll probably stay around for a few minutes if you have any other last minute questions, but hopefully you have a good rest of your conference, and we'll hopefully see you soon. Thanks.
Great. Yeah.